us the fight of our lives.
Wealth inequality in the United States has dramatically increased in recent decades.
The wealthiest 1% holds about 40% of all wealth, and the bottom 90% holds less than 1/4% of all wealth. Over the past decade, Jared Kushner quadrupled his wealth to $324 million, but he paid no income taxes for the last few years. The US tax code is clearly not working for everyone. For the last 40 years, the entire economy has changed. A trickle-down agenda, tax cut for the rich, deregulation for corporations, and wage stagnation for everyone else. America has an income inequality problem it hasn't seen since the Golden Age.
And Elizabeth Warren has a plan for it.
In Senator Warren's tax plan, it's got some eyebrows raised.
The plan is pretty straightforward on paper. It targets the richest 0.1% of American households. If you have a net worth of more than 50 million, you'll be taxed at 2 cents on every dollar you own above 50 million, and 6 cents on every dollar above 1 billion. Warren thinks this would raise $2.75 trillion over the next 10 years, and she can use this to pay for universal childcare for every child 0 to 5, universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, free tuition college and student loan forgiveness.
The wealth tax would considerably decrease the enormous wealth concentration. The tax is cumulative and it would be applied year after year.
Had this plan been in place for the last 20 years, Jeff Bezos would be worth 30 billion instead of 100 billion, and Bill Gates would be worth 14 billion instead of 97 billion.
Even Donald Trump proposed a one-off wealth tax in 1999. He proposed a hefty 14.25% wealth tax on citizens worth 10 million or more. Now Trump claimed that this would generate 5.7 trillion in new taxes, which could be used to eliminate the entire national debt.
On her website, she has a wealth tax calculator for billionaires like Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg. A hedge fund manager got on CNBC and started crying about the wealth tax. You know what the campaign did? They started selling billionaire tiers mugs. I mean, this has support from both sides. Republicans support it. Democrats love this. Over 60% of registered voters back this plan. A month ago, Elizabeth Warren had a huge jump in the polls. At one point, it was very clear she was going to be the nominee. She was up in Iowa, California. She was leading Joe Biden in most polls. And then she had to backtrack on Medicare for All to a public option. And that started her downfall. The main problem with the wealth tax is figuring out how to enforce it. A wealth of someone isn't straightforward as you think. Net worths are bundled up in all types of assets. For example, stocks, bonds, real estate, cryptocurrencies, and private businesses. It can be a nightmare to raise revenues, which clearly explains why many governments in Europe used to have a wealth tax, but today only a few handful of countries still has it as law.
In 1990s, 12 countries had a wealth tax. Since then, Denmark, Germany, Finland, Sweden, and many more countries have repealed the wealth tax. The French government says around 10,000 people with 35 billion euros in assets have left the country because of the wealth tax between 2002 and 2017.
The wealth tax would absolutely skyrocket tax havens. The rich always find illegal ways to hide their wealth, with false accounting, undervaluing their asset. It creates an incentive for people to hide their wealth, and it doesn't always raise as much revenue as you might expect. The revenue the French government got from the wealth tax was rather disappointing. Only a few billion euros at its peak, or about 1% of France's total revenue from all taxes. When these millionaires left, France lost most of their income tax revenues.
But Warren's plan does draw lessons from European failures.
Now, Warren's plan does have an exit penalty. If anyone wants to leave the country, their wealth would be taxed at a ridiculous rate, to a point where it wouldn't even make sense to leave the country. And unlike the French wealth tax, Warren's plan isn't that complicated. The French plan was overly complicated. It started off with 800,000 euros and above. It had 6 different brackets in 2011. Compare that to Warren's plan, it starts off with 50 million and above, and has just 2 brackets. Elizabeth Warren is an extremely smart woman. She was the one who proposed and established the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. She predicted the 2008 financial crisis with such accuracy, but makes no sense when you could raise taxes in much less complicated ways that actually has a chance of passing through the Congress.
Close corporate and individual tax loopholes, increase the corporate tax to 25%, and increase the estate tax which many billionaires are for.
There are so many easy and moral ways to raise 2.6 trillion. Tom Steyer has a better chance of becoming the president than the wealth tax getting passed through the Congress.
Even though, in theory, the wealth tax will drastically reduce the wealth inequality, unfortunately it's not practical.